Jamie, should I go ahead and kick us off?
Yep, you can start, Dave. Thank you.
Great. All right, welcome everybody to this month's local government coordination call. Today we have a update from DOLA, which I'll be giving here in a minute, plus an update on Medicaid. And we'll anchor it with the Colorado Resiliency Office providing a webinar on social equity and community. Following with that, we'll have the usual question and answers and then a short survey before we adjourn. So starting off with the DOLA highlights, on the Division of Housing side, we have Proposition 123. Congratulations to the City of Salida as the first local government to file a successful commitment to increase its baseline of affordable housing by 3% each year for the next 3 years. Following them, we have the City of Sheridan, the City of Fort Collins, the Town of Breckenridge, and the Town of Hayden have each submitted a commitment that is currently under review. And then finally, the City of Westminster and Summit County have also indicated that they're going to be filing commitments here in the near future. We also have a summer statewide outreach for housing. Each summer, Housing Colorado, along with CHAFA and the Division of Housing, hit the road and visit local communities to talk about housing. This year, they'll be joined by OEDIT and the Division of Local Government. We have a lot to discuss with the start of Proposition 123 funding, changes as a result of new legislation, and much more. We hope that you'll join us for one of 6 stops this summer. And for more information and to register, please visit Housing Colorado's website, which is being linked in the chat along with the dates and the locations. On the Division of Local Government side, we have the Conservation Trust Fund. This is a portion of lottery proceeds that go directly to local governments. And this is based on population, and it's for parks and recreation purposes. And this month, we have completed the quarterly distribution of $79.5 million, which was distributed to more than 480 participating local governments. We also have the Regional Infrastructure Development Summits, which are being hosted by the state to help local communities navigate the funding opportunities associated with the Infrastructure Improvements and Job Act, also known as IIJA. That kicked off last month. DOLA, the Division of Local Government, and the Colorado Resiliency Office are some of the partners supporting these summits. Please see the link in the chat to view the rest of the dates and locations, and we hope to see you there. We also have 2 new Energy and Mineral Impact Fund set-aside opportunities, and those applications will be opening on June 30th. The first is the More Housing Now and Land Use Initiative, which helps address the significant demand for local government infrastructure to support affordable housing development. The second is the Climate Resilience Challenge. This is a $20 million set aside over the next 3 fiscal years that will encourage and support local governments to promote and integrate climate resilience projects that capture multiple objectives across climate adaptation and mitigation solution to holistically address the most high-risk vulnerabilities of the region while advancing inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We encourage you to think big. More information is on the EIAF website, linked in the chat. And then finally, we have the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund Tier 2 hearings. Those are going to be in Denver on June 28th to the 30th. Those will immediately follow the CML conference and located at the CSU Spur campus of the National Western Stock Show. From the State Demography Office, we have a couple updates. The State Demography Office will start sending out the draft 2022 population estimates for review by local governments this week. These estimates are used for program planning and funding allocations like the Conservation Trust Fund. Please carefully review your estimates and send any questions to the contact listed on the review form. The State Demography Office is also starting to prepare population and housing forecasts by age and county. Forecasts based on 2021 are currently available on the SDO website. If you have questions or feedback, please contact Cindy DeGroen at cindy.degroen@state.co.us, and that contact will be dropped in the chat as well. Finally, we have today's webinar, which is the part of the Pathways to Recovery and Resiliency Funding series, and it'll be focused on social equity and community funding. The webinar will be introduced by Shale Sabo from the Colorado Resiliency Office following our additional updates. And with that, let's go with the first update. I'm going to turn it over to Adela Flores Brennan with the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Planning to give us an update on Medicare.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to have an update from Healthcare Policy and Financing today about the end of the public health emergency, which many of you may have heard quite a lot about. So you might be aware that during the public health emergency, we were able to keep people covered on Medicaid and CHIP, regardless of any changes to their eligibility status. So that meant that over the course of the last couple of years, our membership has grown to 1.75 million people in Colorado. So that's 1 in 4 people who are currently enrolled with Medicaid and the CHIP program, regardless of whether they may or may not be eligible. So now that the public health emergency is over, we can begin unwinding that continuous coverage requirement. It's a very large task because, of course, we want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening. We want to make sure that anybody who is still eligible for Medicaid or CHIP are retaining their eligibility and are not dropped from Medicaid because they didn't see the notification or didn't get a chance to renew. So we have begun the process of notifying and disenrolling people. We sent out our first notifications in March for May renewals, and each month we will be sending out a large batch of notifications. We will be seeking to renew every Medicaid member on the date of their scheduled renewal. So each month, we are not trying to do a renewal for all 1.75 million members all at one time. We will take the next 12 months to go through this entire process. So we just, as of the end of May, rolled off or found ineligible our first batch of individuals. So we should have some data and reporting available on that this week or next that will go up on our website. So the process and communications that we are sending to folks, we send out, the department sends out a renewal packet, email, text, push notification via our app. We then send out reminders. We work with our regional entities and our CHIP plans to schedule additional outreach. And that's after we've already done our best to renew members using information that we already have access to via federal data services hubs and state data services hubs. So we may be able to, and in the past month, we were able to renew about 40% of our folks just using behind the scenes methods, or what we call ex parte renewal. For anybody who we are not able to renew in that way, electronically behind the scenes, we send out the renewal packet, and then we're doing a lot of follow-up to make sure they see it, that they respond. If they haven't taken action, we have our partners reach out to them. And then when they are ultimately found, if they are ultimately found ineligible for Medicaid, we send data over to Connect for Health Colorado, the marketplace, and they will do some outreach to individuals to try and get them enrolled in private insurance. We have a public service announcement campaign on TV and radio. I mentioned that we are working with our partners to do text message campaigns. We have videos, we have toolkits on our website. We have a partner and member FAQ on the website. I will be pasting a link in the chat so you can check out information on our website. And then I'll also send out a PowerPoint deck that has all of this information in greater detail, as well as additional links. We have translated and are working to transcreate all of our materials in 11 languages. So it's already in English and Spanish, but in another 11 languages that are the top languages spoken by members in the state of Colorado. We will soon have fully transcreated materials. We also just want you all to know that there are, of course, scammers out there. And so it's important just to create awareness around the fact that scammers are targeting Medicaid members during this renewal process. They are well aware that it's happening. They will call people up and tell them that it's time to renew. Of course, that's great, but then they'll ask for money and they'll ask for information that as Medicaid we would not otherwise be asking for. So we want to make sure folks are aware that that is happening. It's really unfortunate, and it kind of changes your perspective on the trustworthiness of people, but just be aware that it's happening. We have some data in the PowerPoint deck that I'll send to you about how many text messages and notifications we're sending out to folks, so you can take a look at that. We, as I mentioned, will be posting all of our data. So we are reporting monthly to the federal government. We'll be posting that data along with some graphics and an explainer document on our website, so you can understand what the data is that we're reporting on, what the terms mean, and that type of thing. So look for that. Like I said, we were aiming for this week or next to get that posted. We do have a resource center with toolkits and FAQs, as I had mentioned, and I will go ahead and put that link in the chat. And that's everything I have. I don't know if I have time for questions or anything.
Thank you, Adela. Yeah, questions will be saved till the end, but Dave, if you want to introduce the Pathways webinar.
Certainly. Let me turn it over to Shale Sabo to talk about social equity in community.
Great, thank you so much, Dave. So yes, we are again doing our Pathways to Recovery and Resiliency Funding webinar series. For folks who are new, this series is meant to break down state and local funding opportunities, and these are to better help local governments and community partners navigate and access potential solutions for the challenges that they are facing. This series is hosted by the CRO in partnership with OEDIT and collaboration from multiple other state agencies. Today, as Dave mentioned, we are talking social equity and community funding opportunities, and we have a very jam-packed agenda for this webinar today. I think this is a record number of speakers we've had so far, and we have 4 wonderful speakers, including Jackie Stanton from DOLA. We have Gabriella Bohm from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. We will have Nasa Birmingham from CDOT to talk about Main Street funding, and then we will round it out with Melanie Coletti from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. Before we jump in, I just wanted to kind of help set the context for this conversation and to give a little bit of background. So first and foremost, equity is resilience. And we just wanted to point out that not only is equity a priority at the state level, but it's actually a federal priority as well. And we're actually seeing that a lot more often in things such as the Justice 40 initiatives that look at environmental justice initiatives, as well as the components of the IIJA, or Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act funding opportunities. So this is the way that the federal system is moving forward. And it's just really great to see that we as a state are also really looking at how we can prioritize this and set ourselves up for an equitable future, and so that all members of our community can thrive in Colorado. Equity is a critical aspect of building resilient communities. If we experience inequity, that results in barriers to resources, which of course contribute to social vulnerability. If there is not an equal access or opportunity to needed resources, especially during times of disruption, that is a contribution to social vulnerability. And as a matter of fact, if you look at our Colorado Resiliency Framework, we do include social equity as one of the primary lenses through which we look at all sorts of strategies as they relate to resiliency, to make sure that that is one of the core components in anything that we do as far as taking action. It's also one of the 9 resiliency criteria that we have identified as a state, so that when we look at investing in sustainable and long-term projects or programs, we make sure that there is an equity component to ensure that that is long-lasting into the future and that it benefits the whole community. One thing I do want to point out is that equity is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This will look differently for each community, and it'll be defined differently for each community depending on a variety of factors, including socioeconomic demographics or the size of your community and much more. So just wanting to keep that in mind, that this might be defined a little bit differently for each community. And if you want to continue this conversation, we do have an upcoming webinar opportunity through our Climate and Future Adaptations webinar. So this is another series that we do offer through the CRO and in partnership with the Colorado Energy Office, as well as multiple other state agencies. And we have our next webinar coming up on July 18th from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. That's looking at social equity and community collaboration and looking at best practices and some great local examples. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jackie, who's going to talk about inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility.
Thank you so much, Shale. Thank you all so much for coming to our webinar today. As Shale said, I am the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Coordinator for DOLA. Next slide, please. My conversation today comes from the governor's mandate that says very clearly that we will only reach our potential as a state when all Coloradoans can live, work, learn, play, and thrive in healthy and equitable environments. It is our agenda that Colorado is committed to working together and leading the nation in equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. Therefore, EDI is at the core of our values and is a top priority for our vision for Colorado for all. Next slide, please. DOLA's understanding is that we have developed an universal policy to guide and direct the state agencies in creating long-term strategic plans with the goal of inclusive and discriminatory working places and cultures, and implementing equitable hiring, compensation, and retention practices. Next slide, please. Our vision is that DOLA embodies these ideals and practices and accessibility, recognizing that mutual respect and belonging results in a more productive workforce and a just society. Next slide, please. Here at DOLA, we have operationalized this in 4 buckets: education, accessibility, outcomes, and culture. So as you can see, 2 of these are related to all of our internal efforts, and the other 2, accessibility and outcomes, are all community facing. It is our agenda to use data and the legislation to remove barriers and create sustainable communities that are equitable for everyone. We spent a lot of time in the last year taking a look at how our programs, especially our American Recovery Funds, were used to address these issues here in Colorado. Next slide, please. So for us, the thought is that making a program inclusive, equitable, and accessible includes these 6 factors: where the program is located, what populations we focus on, what are the equity metrics or the data that is used to collect for our programs around their outreach and their efforts in the community, who are our end users, and how do we develop effective technical assistance measures to support all of our stakeholders in doing this kind of outreach. We also want to use programs that intentionally include the lived experience of those individuals who live in our communities. Next slide, please. Here in Colorado, we have used our money in the last year to support programming all over the state. As you can see, we've got some states that received more funding and other states that received, other counties, excuse me, that received less. We are very interested in this coming year in addressing those counties that received less money than before, only because, again, we are very invested in developing an equitable process that reaches our most vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. In the Division of Housing, our funds were distributed 50% in the urban community and 50% in rural resort communities. We did identify some focus populations for our programming, but faced challenges at the federal and divisional levels. Our equity metrics were established by our stakeholders, but they're generally more diverse in the urban communities. They're ethnically diverse in the urban communities as opposed to our rural and rural resort communities. It is clear, however, that we have more socioeconomic diversity in our rural communities. Our end users came from a variety of sources, indicating a need for more diversity within this group. And for us, that means in 2023, that's going to mean expanding our stakeholders. So our internal factors unique to Department of Housing reduced opportunities for technical assistance and outreach for grantees. Our outreach expanded access to web resources and funding announcements that help to increase the diversity of our stakeholders. Additionally, the inclusion of all individuals with lived experience in program design and implementation has been promoted within each of our applications. Next slide, please. Within the Division of Local Government, we experienced far more diversity. These were, the funds were distributed primarily in rural and rural resort communities with higher support in the North and Southwest. Our focus populations were actually entire communities because the Division of Local Government expends funds to local governments. We only have one grant that goes to nonprofits, and we're reaching the second phase. And I'll answer Colleen's question in just a moment. Our focus populations, we did have some focus populations that stressed socioeconomic status. We used this, the diversity of our rural and rural resort recipients, but expanded the outreach, our outreach as a priority and achieved a number of those goals. Oh, thank you. So most of our programs, as I said, served in entire communities with some very specific groups in their that specified end users in their applications. We employed our regional managers that allowed us closer collaboration with stakeholders and increased the technical assistance that we were able to provide. Our outreach included a newly implemented tool, helped to expand the diversity of stakeholders. Within our Division of Local Government, we developed a process where we did letters of intent first, so that we could recruit stakeholders that wanted us to invest in their communities. And then we used our regional managers to assist us in providing that technical assistance. And as I said, our programs utilize lived experience groups as a part of their outreach. And this was facilitated by our regional managers. Next slide, please. And that's it for me. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie. And next we have Gabriella Bohm from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment.
Awesome, thanks, Shale. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriella Bain. I am the Environmental Justice Grant Specialist within the Environmental Justice Program with Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So the Environmental Justice Program was created in June 2021, shortly before Governor Polis signed the Environmental Justice Act, which was House Bill 21-1266, into law on July 2nd, 2021. This is our current fully staffed team, although based on current legislation and things that have passed, I believe we will be expanding. But as you can see, this is our current team. Next slide, please. So a little overview of our grant program, and I'm also going to provide some links in the chat to follow along or to get more information rather. So this is a new grant program within the Environmental Justice Program. And it was created because Colorado communities of color and low-income communities bear a disproportionate burden of environmental health risks. The overall goal of the grant program was to redistribute penalty revenue from enforcement actions to the communities that were harmed by the violations. The Environmental Justice Act provided specific grant requirements that were included in the development of the Request for Application, or RFA. And priority communities were identified using Colorado EnviroScreen, which helped identify areas with current and past environmental inequities, pinpoint communities that face a greater burden of environmental health risks, and identify DI communities or disproportionately impacted communities based on the definition in the Colorado Environmental Justice Act. I do want to note that the General Assembly recently updated the definition of a DI community, which I will provide a little more detail in later slides. So this grant program is going to be one fiscal year. Since it's a new program, we wanted to kind of keep it simple as we start out and learn from it. And the awards were ranging from $50,000 to $250,000 for a max of $1 million. Submissions for the application or for the grant program were due early February, and awards were determined in March. The advisory board shaped the RFA and selected the grantees for funding. This advisory board is a 12-member volunteer board who are appointed by the governor and the director of CDPHE. The advisory board really wanted to make the RFA broad so projects could focus on any environmental medium, and all organizations were eligible for this first grant cycle. And I will link the advisory board here so you can have more information on who is currently on the board. And our next RFA is likely to be released September of 2023. That's our current goal. We have to gather feedback from the advisory board and from community members who participated in this first grant cycle. Next slide, please. So our grant is funded through the Community Impact Cash Fund, and this is funded by penalties collected from entities that violate air pollution control laws, rules, and permits. Each fiscal year, 20% is added to that. So you can see we are at 60% of the total penalty revenue that is coming into the Community Impact Cash Fund. Fiscal year 25-26, all of the penalty revenue will be coming into the Community Impact Cash Fund. Next slide, please. So our grant program supports communities by providing funding to conduct interventions and participate in agency processes to advocate for policy changes such as trainings on how to participate in agency rulemakings, or hiring experts to provide testimony or representation in the permitting proceeding. The program also funds projects that avoid, minimize, measure, and mitigate impacts to public health and environmental health risks, as well as advance a healthy and sustainable Colorado where everyone has equitable protection from environmental and health hazards. All organizations were eligible for this first grant cycle. Again, the board wanted to keep things as broad as possible, and it's subject to change in later or subsequent years rather, but this first year, everyone was eligible. Next slide. So additional eligibility criteria. So organizations had to be within a DI community, which meant that the census block group had an EnviroScreen score over the 80th percentile, or the census block group met one of the 3 demographic prongs from the Environmental Justice Act, which was 40% of the population are people of color, low income, or housing cost burden. So the new statutory definition has been updated to 50% housing cost burden, and additionally added if there's 20% linguistically isolated, meaning that there's limited English speaking in the household. They kept the 80th percentile for EnviroScreen, and they added additional prongs such as a history prong, Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute Reservation, and mobile homes. So I will include that link too for more information there. Next slide, please. So the overall goal for this grant program was to have an equitable grant program that targets those most impacted by environmental injustice. So we encouraged partnerships between organizations, and applicants needed to include information on how their project would include community members before, during, and after. That was something the board really wanted to make sure that individuals included, so that the projects were community involved and not just an organization doing a project for a community. Eligible projects or applications had to be within a disproportionately impacted community, and there were 3 ways to demonstrate this eligibility. So first, the office address of the organization applying for the grant is located within a DI community. Second, the office address for the lead organization in a collaborative application is located in a DI community. And third, the project location itself is in a disproportionately impacted community. Next slide, please. And I'm going to also include the link to the Grant Cycle 1 materials for referencing. So this slide provides an overview of the organizations who were awarded grant funding this first year, how much they were awarded, and what area of Colorado their projects serve. Next slide, please. So the technical assistance information, so we provided webinars. We had a pre-RFA release webinar to kind of discuss the grant program was coming and what to look for. We had 2 webinars that explained the details about the grant program, and then we had question and answers and an FAQ document. So we had questions come in via email as well as questions through those webinars. So we made sure that we responded to all of those and updated those every week as possible. Additionally, when there were EnviroScreen questions, we directed individuals to our my coworker, Rani Kumar, and general inquiries went to our CDPHE EJ email address. And if there were any questions that our team didn't specifically know, we were able to reach out to others within the department to get those questions answered. Next slide, please. So these last 2 slides are for other grant funding opportunities. I had individuals reach out to me and they wanted to include this information so you guys were all aware. So this first one is the Office of Health Equity, Health Disparities, and Community Grant Program. RFA will be released this fall 2023 for the grant cycle of fiscal year 25 to 27. Any additional questions regarding this grant program, you can be directed to the email address on this slide, the healthequity@state.colorado. Next slide, please. And the other grant program was the CDPHE COVID-19 Health Equity and Immunization Funding. So the grant funding for this goes until May 31st, 2024. And any questions for this grant program can be directed to the email address on this slide. Next slide, please. And any questions about our grant program, you're welcome to reach out to me, Gabriella Bain. Any general questions about the environmental justice program, feel free to reach out to our manager, Joel Miner. And then any general inquiries can go to our CDPHE EJ email address. And that is all I have. So thanks so much for having us, me.
Great, thank you so much, Gabriella. And next we have Nesa from CDOT to talk about revitalizing main streets.
Great, thank you so much, Shale. Gabriella, thanks for your presentation, and Jackie as well. I am happy to come to you and share a little bit about information about the Colorado Department of Transportation's Active Transportation Grant Program. So next slide. So we do have a large portfolio of active transportation infrastructure grants at CDOT. Most specifically, I will be addressing one, which is called Revitalizing Main Streets, mostly because of its ease of process and focus on equity. But in general, our grants portfolio does include a really strong facilitation of active transportation infrastructure. What that means is helping pedestrians encourage a safe environment for movement, as well as bicycle riders and other rollers. We also have a role in magnetizing community utilization of active transportation to encourage socialization and utilization of economic hubs. So what that means is getting people out of their homes and into our downtown areas so that they can be reducing their social isolation, as well as like encouraging economic activity. It's also really important to note the reason why active transportation is such a focus for CDOT is because it is the most inclusive mobility option for all people, irrelevant of socioeconomic status or ability. Next slide. So the Revitalizing Main Street program specifically, we are a grant program that if you think about Shale's resiliency framework, we are focused on the infrastructure component. And infrastructure certainly doesn't work in isolation and impacts the other areas in her framework, but this is the one area where we really can make an impact. And the Revitalizing Main Streets program is a grant program who is eligible for these specific applicants: local governments, business improvement districts, council of governments, as long as they're applying on behalf of the lowest local jurisdiction. And additional component that I think it's important to note is we also support university or colleges. The way that this grant program considers applications is through a scoring rubric, and we really like to be transparent in our scoring rubric. So what this means is when someone applies for an application to receive grant funding, we measure them based on these 5 components. Does the project improve pedestrian or bicycle built environment? Does it encourage economic development? And what that means is it connected to downtown? Does it provide safe mobility for equitably disadvantaged residents? And is the project ready to go? In addition, is it using an innovative approach to thinking about how we use our public spaces? One thing I really wanted to note, which isn't necessarily a part of the scoring rubric, but is essential, is we will weed out applications that include planning and designing. We really only fund the construction of this infrastructure. And it can be on a CDOT road or it can be on a locally owned road. There is no requirement either way. Next slide. So how much? This is the question I think we get most frequently. This grant program can fund up to $250,000 of an infrastructure project. So in many cases, that could be street trees for your downtown area, or it could be pedestrian level lighting for like the 4-block radius of downtown. We do require a 10% match irrelevant of your DI community status. That can be fundraised, that can be utilized from other grant programs. It's just a requirement that we must adhere to. Applications are available at this link. There are 3 remaining deadlines for this year. We accept applications on a rolling basis. So anytime a community would like to submit, we will accept. They are reviewed based on a deadline schedule, which is every other month. So July 26th, September 27th, and November 29th. We are not a grant program that only has one open and closed sort of deadline. We continually will be funding programs on a regular basis through the year of 2032. A community can come back every single year for a new application. Unless an application is declined, then you can come back as many times as you want until you are approved. So what I usually say to applicants and awardees is consider a long-term strategy for your pedestrian and bike infrastructure and think about chipping away at it on an annual basis with this funding applications. Next slide. So here are some things to consider. Looking at your master plan, your community plan, or town gossip, what are some unsafe or pedestrian and bike infrastructure improvements that could really better support your community? Are your streets ADA accessible? Do you have multiple languages that you need to make sure that wayfinding addresses? Are there safe buffers for your pedestrian areas like sidewalks or protected bike lanes? Next slide. So what we can do to better support you is think about those areas and chat with us. This is our email address. In addition, every Wednesday from 8 to 9 a.m., we have open office hours. That means if you're available and you have a question or want us to review your application before you submit it, just drop in. If that doesn't work, schedule time with us via our email address. Next slide. So finally, we would just want to reiterate, we are accessible and available, and we want to be there for you if you have questions about the applications or the projects or the process. This is our email address. This is our website. And again, every Wednesday from 8 to 9 a.m., we have open office hours. That means drop in if you are available. Thanks so much. Next slide. I appreciate.
Oh, go ahead, Nisa.
No worries. I appreciate you giving me the chance to talk, and we look forward to seeing applications from you.
Thank you so much. As one final reminder, we will be taking question and answers at the end, and please feel free along the way to put any questions you have into the chat or into the Q&A function. We will address those as soon as our presentations are over. And so with that, we have Melanie to help round us out from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment talking about digital equity funding. So go ahead, Melanie.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here too. Let's go ahead with the first slide. This is just the 8 covered populations that are identified in the Digital Equity Act, and that is part of the IIJA. So we are receiving money from NTIA, and we are charged with making a digital equity plan for the entire state of Colorado. The same work is going on in every state in the country, and all of us are going to identify how to improve equity for all of these covered populations, plus just Coloradans in general, using the measurable objectives on the right side of this slide. And we can go to the next one. So we are in the process now of figuring out what people need in their communities. We have a public survey that's about to launch possibly next week. We are the first state to offer it in 20 languages. And we discovered what languages to use by contracting with vendors who are community-based organizations. So they'll be supporting people in the administration of those surveys so that we can get some good baseline data to find out what communities need. All of you can participate by taking our asset inventory survey. It's called the DEAM tool, Digital Equity Ecosystem Mapping. And I'll talk about our funding opportunity a little bit later, but we want to have anybody who's in the digital equity space currently, or is maybe thinking about being in the digital equity space, to fill out this short survey so that we know who's potentially going to be able to partner with another org or government or business even. Next slide, please. We're also doing stakeholder engagement. These are just 5 ways that we have tried to engage with people over the last, well, I began my work in September of last year. So the Digital Equity Working Group in the middle there is the one I want to highlight. We have 2 meetings left, and if any of you would like to attend, you are certainly welcome. I am going to actually, there's a bunch of links in chat so you can see different ways that you can get engaged. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So yeah, these are planning funds that we're using right now to create our digital equity plan for the state. And then in 2024, probably early to mid 2024, we'll receive around $20 million in capacity funds through the Digital Equity Act. And Instead of funding individual organizations, we are going to fund groups of organizations. So we don't know what we'll call them yet, maybe coalitions or something like that. The goal is to increase digital equity across Colorado, but obviously $20 million is not going to be enough to give everyone a computer and teach everyone the skills they need to use the computers over this 5-year period. So we want communities to take control of their own needs and identify them as teams, and then request money so that we can support with whatever needs they identify. So partnerships are going to be key. We are planning kind of what that looks like now. So if you have input for us on, what you've seen work or not work in coalitions, different structure ideas, whatever you've got, we are open to it right now because, like I said, we are still writing the plan. We do have a formal public comment period scheduled for maybe mid-September, probably more like early October of this year, and there will be more about that to come. Next slide, please. I talked about this already a little bit. I made these slides really text heavy, so you can refer back to them if you need to. Our structure that we're considering is like coalitions or alliances, possibly some kind of community council that any stakeholder in the state can participate in, and then possibly a digital equity advisory board of some sort, so that there are people with some kind of authority in their organizations who are voting members that can help us make decisions and plan, in a higher level kind of way. Next slide, please. So we also have an opportunity coming up soon, actually, the Digital Navigator Serve Colorado opportunity. Serve Colorado is actually managing most of this, and then we're providing program support. This is through state legislation, actually, that happened in 2022. And digital navigators, for those of you who don't know, are individuals who work with individuals primarily. They sometimes provide tech classes, but they're there to help people accomplish a particular goal that they have. We know that this is accessible in communities across the state, but it's never been deployed in the United States as a statewide program before. So this should be an interesting pilot to watch. We have a new RFA coming out through Serve Colorado on July 10th, and we'll be looking for intermediary sites, which means that they will oversee the administration of the program for at least 7, they call them MSYs at Serve Colorado, but they're essentially full-time employees. And they can be in multiple sites. They don't all have to be through one site. So this is a really interesting opportunity. We have someone on our team who is specifically hired to oversee the program side of this work, using tools that have been demonstrated to work across the country. And the next slide is just different ways for you to stay up to date and get involved with any of this work. Some of it's still in progress, like I said, so I don't have, immediate opportunities to post for everything. I do host digital equity open houses at noon on Fridays on Zoom. And if you go to our website, which I had put in the chat, there's a calendar on there for the Colorado Broadband Office and our engagement opportunities. So you can sign up through there. There's an interest form link that I provided as well if you want either emails from me or interested in more information about the Digital Equity Committee. And then the Digital Navigator special competition dates and information will be on the Serve Colorado website. And I will also make sure that they're on our digital equity website. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Melanie. So at this point in time, we will go ahead and open it up to question and answer. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat and we will get through them. Otherwise, you can use the question and answer feature down at the bottom row of tools here in your Zoom screen. So the first question that we have was for Jackie, and it was under housing. When you were reviewing some of the housing programs, what were the external factors that limited technical assistance?
Well, we actually had at least two. One is that the way the system is set up here in Colorado, most of our programming happens through our continuum of care providers. And so they provide all of the technical assistance. What we've been working on is trying to expand our outreach. As an example, we've been working with our developers to expand the diversity of developers, both ethnic and geographic locations across the state. And the second thing that we've been doing is working with our program managers to develop ways for us to do very specifically language diversity outreach opportunities, so that we want to expand all of our outreach opportunities. And so we're focusing on language issues right now. So those are the two things.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie. I am not seeing any other questions in the chat for anyone. And I do not see any in the question and answer so far. But let's see here. There was a question above on the link. Oh, okay, sorry, Colleen, thank you. So for the electric vehicle charging and parking requirements link, it led to, it looks like it led to the House bill, but it looks like we're looking for something else for the DI definition. So Gabriella, if you don't mind throwing another link in there.
Yeah, so it's actually within that House bill. It's kind of confusing because the House bill is like a EV charging and park requirement, but later on in the bill, it discusses the definition change. So you just need to click on that link and then go to view recent bill text, and then you can control find to look for the disproportionately impacted community information.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Gabriella. All right, and then we do have a question coming in that says, for environmental justice, is there funding for landfills? And then also as a follow-up to that question, is there funding for a private startup for residential trash service?
Funding for landfills. I mean, you would have to create your application that would align with what's required in the Environmental Justice Act. So, for example, there was like a applicant that submitted cleaning up an area in the Denver area that I believe used to be a landfill, or it was a brownfield site. So really, as long as you create a application that supports, you know, how your program minimizes, measures or mitigates impacts to public health and the environment, or the other one where you're participating in agency rulemakings, you can make the argument there. Additionally, funding for a private startup for residential trash service. That one I am not as sure about. I don't want to say no, but I don't feel like that one would fall as well into the category for the program.
Great, thank you, Gabriella. And we have gotten some folks that are asking for copies of the slides. Those will be sent out following this call later this week. And then also we do have links to webinars on our website at coresiliency.com. One more question here. At the Regional IIJA Summit, there was a discussion of the state having a list of vendors/consultants that could be a resource for grant writing. Is this something that the state is still working on providing? Carrie, thank you for your question. We will, normally we have our IIJA coordinator on this call. She was unable to attend today, but we will get back to you all with an answer on that. As far as I know, I do believe that is something that's still in progress, but we just want to make sure to clarify with her. Go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as part of our work, I mean, I know you're not asking specifically about digital equity work, but I think this is something that came up when we were at Rural Philanthropy Days in Durango recently, and I hope that we're able to incorporate that as an option for people who are applying for digital equity funding from us. It's something that we're definitely looking into. So thank you for bringing that up again. And just know that it's probably an option for this funding.
All right, so I think that does round up our questions. If there are any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we will go ahead and turn it over to Jemmy to do our engagement survey.
Thank you, Shale. I'll just go ahead and share this quick survey. I'll give you all a minute to answer. And once you're finished, I will share the results. And Danielle or Shale, if you want to take a screenshot, I will also have that in the follow-up email. Okay, thank you all. I'm just going to share it. And that's it for the survey poll.
Great. So Dave did have to leave at 11:45, so I will go ahead and do the closing remarks. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending this out to everyone who has registered for this call. And if you are looking for the webinar slides and the recordings, those are available at coresiliency.com. So please be on the lookout for that. And then we appreciate everyone's time today, and we will see you again next month on the third Wednesday at 11 a.m. Have a wonderful rest of your week. We are adjourned.